Dear learners, today we will be discussing about GIS, Geographical Information System, and Environmental Impact Assessment. This is the part of course Environmental Impact Assessment for Environmental Health. As we all know, Geographical Information System is an emerging science, and this is having umpteen number of applications in varied field, starting from geography, any spatial science for that matter, and incidentally GIS has found a lot of applications in environmental impact assessment as well, as this environmental impact assessment deals with the spatial features, spatial subject. So, spatial analysis is very much part of environmental impact assessment. Let us see what GIS is. Geographical Information System are basically the databases with powerful mapping capabilities. The information in the database, the spatial database, are spatially referenced. That is a basic feature of any information, or in other words the databases. The geographical information attempts to manipulate and analyze the spatial database and display whatever the results it is obtaining, display the maps with relative ease and accuracy. This is the nutshell, in nutshell, the essence of GIS. And when you talk about GIS as a system, it is basically a combination of computer cartographic system that stores map data. That is what I talked about, the database, and a database management system that stores the attribute data. See, in other words, the data what we are talking about is, it is having two components, one is the spatial component, the other one is the attribute data, and it is well managed by using a database management system, DBMS system. This GIS is, in other words, it is a software package that accommodates the entry, management, analysis and presentation of georeferenced data. Okay. So, this GIS system involves, like any other information system, it involves data capture and storage, data manipulation and analysis and presentation of results. These are the basic steps involved in GIS systems. Okay. Let us see one by one. As regards the data capture, the primary data capture techniques that is a part of GIS are the ground surveying and use of passive and remote sensing tools, and the third one is the global positioning system. These are the basic three techniques that are adopted to capture the primary data. As regards the secondary data, yes, there are different techniques are there. The secondary data capture techniques involve basically the digitizing and scanning the paper maps or aerial photographs. With respect to data storage, we talked about the data capture, and with respect to the data storage, the GIS system uses certain models. They are either the raster models or vector models. With respect to the that models, it is a very interesting point, because based on these models even the GIS system has been categorized. When you look at the raster models store maps using simplified version of a matrix file, wherein the different square, there is a cells, it is called rasters, are storing the information, both the attribute data and also the spatial data. So, basically the raster models involve storing the information, the map information in certain rasters or small cells. Okay. Since I said it is involving the raster or small cells, it requires huge space, and that is indeed an limitation of raster models. And second point, as far as the raster models is concerned, the accuracy of what are the features we are talking about is determined by the size of the cells. Okay. But the limitation is definitely it occupies huge space, it demands a lot of space, that is the limitation of raster models. On the other hand, the vector models represent map features in terms of the point features, line features or the area or the polygons. So that are these all the features that has been very much part of the vector models, and these features have been accommodated in the vector models by the precise coordinates of their defining points and also the ends of the segments, okay, whether it is a point segment, the feature, or the lines or the polygons. Okay. So, in other words, the space requirement is much lesser when you compare with the raster models. Why? Because here the vector models deals with only the coordinates of the features, whether it is a line segment or a polygons. So, only the coordinates are involved in this thing. So, definitely the space required for storing the information is much lesser. And also, if you see the vector data can be stored in by terms of layers, the layers. See, each and every layer can signify a feature or an object. So, in a way, we are moving into a direction that each and every feature is stored in a layer. So, think about overlaying the layers, think about the spatial analysis, think about how you can use a lot of computing technologies like computers, a lot of algorithms are there. By using those algorithms, we can analyze any complex features. Complex means I am talking about the map which is involving lot of layers in it. So, that is the beauty of the vector models. It is perhaps a lot of modification or a lot of advantages, it is much advantageous to the raster models when you compare the raster models, but nevertheless each and every model is having its own significance. And the next step as far as the information system is concerned, the geographical information system is concerned, it is the data manipulation and analysis, because we have just talked about the capture and the storage component. The next comes the manipulation, how best you can manipulate, and of course manipulation with the basic purpose is that it has to meet certain objectives depending on the users. So, as far as the data manipulation is concerned, it is a very significant aspect of any information system, GIS system. It is a very, very important thing. So, the spatial analysis performed by the GIS include a lot of techniques are there, but the major one is the map overlay, clipping, it is another technique actually, and the other one is the calculating the size, size, it may be the length or the area of the polygon, area of the feature, and also calculating the minimum distances between the features. And using certain distances also we can calculate or we can construct a buffer zone around the features. And the last one is the proximity area analysis. So, in other words, what I want to say is that a lot of analysis will be possible in the GIS, and we have to look at which all analysis can be used in environmental impact assessment. And there are a lot of techniques that can be used in environmental impact assessment, because the GIS provides umpteen number of the features, its inbuilt features. So, that can be very well used. The most popular, the common one is the overlay, map overlay. That is a very important thing, and let us discuss later on those aspects. And if you look at the GIS, the last one as far as the GIS is concerned, it is basically the presentation of the results. And in this case of GIS, the results of the spatial analysis are presented as per the needs of the users, and it has been presented so wonderfully. So, in a way it will be helping not only the users, the end users, but also it will be helping the decision makers. And definitely we know that environmental impact assessment requires demands interdisciplinary team, and wherein the social scientists, the natural scientists, the decision makers, a lot of people are involved in this particular domain of environmental impact assessment. So, in that regard, the result presentation that is more important, that is the significant component, because it should be integrity has to be maintained, and it should be presented in such a way that the person, the users can understand the results, so that the decision can be taken. And as regards the intersection between the GIS and environmental impact assessment, we have just talked about the GIS. Let us see what all the roles the geographical information system, a potential role it can play in environmental impact assessment. Okay, potentially. When you look at the GIS as such, it definitely answers certain intriguing questions. For example, what is where, what spatial pattern exists, and what kind of changes it has taken place. So what I want to say is that certain questions GIS attempts to answer, and interestingly these questions also can be synced with the environmental impact assessment process. Let us see one by one. The first question it is answered, the GIS can answer is that what is where? This question can be related to the screening stage, the scoping stage, and also the baseline studies that is very much part of the environmental impact assessment process. Okay. So, these are all the stages: screening, scoping and baseline studies. In these stages GIS can be very well employed, and that will be definitely helping us to know better the impacts of the projects, development projects. The second important question is the spatial pattern, what spatial pattern exists, and when I talk about exist means I am talking about the baseline maps and what kind of changes it can have because of the development project. So, for that definitely GIS is very helpful because it provides the spatial features, it provides the pattern that is existing on any geographical area. So, this question answers, it can, in fact it helps us to understand the baseline conditions also, and also it helps us in predicting the impacts, and when you talk about predicting the impacts definitely it will be helping us to mitigate as well. Let us see one by one later on. The third question the GIS attempts to answer is the change analysis. Okay. In fact what has changed since, because when I talk about the change analysis 20 years from now what will happen and 20 years in the past, so the change analysis, in order to make it more simpler, the computer based GIS is very helpful, and this particular question, it is very relevant to impact prediction and prediction of changes in the absence of a project, because whatever we are talking about environmental impact assessment, we are talking about the difference between the existence or in the absence of the project. So, in the whether you have to go for the project or not. So, that way this GIS can help us, because it provides us the change analysis, that is most important thing, and rather after the implementation of the project also GIS can be helpful in monitoring the impacts also. So, this is the three questions. The last question is what if. It is a very interesting question. What if, okay, which is the aim of impact prediction as such. And also if we look at it, the what if question, it will be very important in exploring the alternatives and in formulating the mitigation measures. What if, because what if you go for the project, what will happen? If you go for this particular alternative, what will happen? And what kind of, what will be the best alternative that has to be adopted to minimize the impact. So, these kind of definitely answers you can get it from this question what if, and this is very much part of the geographical information system. And coming to the application aspect, the application of GIS in EIS studies, GIS can be used for the basically for the production of maps. It can be a pre-impact assessment or post-impact assessment. So, basic thing is it's the GIS can be used for production of maps. The next one is the technical tasks. GIS can be involved in technical analysis also. As I told you about the GIS analytical techniques like buffering, overlay and clipping. There are so many analytical techniques that is very much inbuilt in the GIS software, and that can be used for environmental impact assessment studies. And the next two application, if you look at it, is that the GIS can be used to the pre-processed data or post-processed data. So, in that sense it can be GIS can be linked with any kind of external models. So, when I talk about models, then it means that I am talking about GIS can be very much integrated in the decision support system, kind of an expert system. It can be very well built into the decision support system. So, GIS is having a lot of applications as far as environmental impact assessment is concerned. Further, the GIS is employed in screening, that is a basic first step, screening, scoping and baseline studies also. When you talk about the screening exercise, basically it decides whether a project requires environmental impact assessment or not. That is a basic objective of a screening exercise. And when you look at the screening, is basically it is based on the characteristics of the project and where the project is located, and also the sensitivity of the project location, and the area nearby. So these are the three important drivers that decides the screening exercise. Okay. Then when you look at the screening of the projects, in fact certain examples are there. GIS can aid in screening of projects whose aerial extent exceeds certain limit, certain thresholds, certain area. And also these GIS can be used in projects which lies in ecologically sensitive locations, ecological sensitive locations. In that case EIA is very, very essential, and when you talk about any project in ecologically sensitive area, GIS can be very, very useful. It must be noted here that both the characteristics and setting of a project will determine many of the impacts. For instance, a proposed project on even agricultural land, definitely it is a fertile land, will require an intensive study of potential impacts on the soil ecosystem and the resources that is available in the agricultural land. So these are all the impacts. So in a way the project proposal, the characteristics of the project and where it is to be located, that also provides a glimpse or a bird's eye view of the possible or potential impacts. Okay. Similarly, a project that emits kind of a pollution, air pollutant or a water pollutant, calls for intensive study of air and water pollution. Okay. If it is air pollutants, definitely we need to look at the air pollution aspect. The more of intensive study is required on that aspect. And when you look at the GIS analysis, in addition to identifying the impacts, it also aids to clarify the spatial importance of the study, because whenever you talk about the spatial, it goes hand in hand with the GIS. Okay. And also the GIS can be a powerful tool for displaying and visualizing trends and patterns in the spatial data sets. It's a very important, because ultimately the end result and how wonderfully we can analyze the results, that is most important thing, and for that GIS is very, very, very useful. And there are a lot of data definitely is there, like a point type data, line data. There are a lot of data are used. When you talk about a point type data, it basically relates to specific sampling locations, point type, pollution monitoring stations, and point source of pollution also, and this is basically well managed with the point type of data. When you talk about the spatially continuous data, for example rainfall data, precipitation data, groundwater, air pollution, they also, because these kind of data can be used to construct a contour map, that will be the most simplest thing. And also if you look at the DTM, that is the digital terrain models, also can be created using this kind of the spatially continuous data. Okay. I mean, now I talked about the linear data. Linear data basically describes the features such as rivers or roads, and that can be very well symbolically presented using a color coding also, and that is definitely through the GIS software it will be very, very helpful. When you talk about the area data means I am talking about, it relates to the discrete spatial units like census data, the sites and habitat patches, kind of a biosphere regions. So these can be very well displayed through choropleth maps. This kind of cartography and map thing is well built in the GIS software. And when you look at the very interesting point is that the GIS is suited to organizing and storing multidisciplinary monitoring data sets into a framework, and which can be analyzed, which can be queried, I am talking about the spatial query, and displayed interactively in order to support and inform the EIA process. This in essence is a very important aspect, because the GIS is run by the DBMS, the database management system, and that talks about, the GIS talks about the framework, it talks about the framework, and that helps us to analyze and asking a lot of questions, what if kind of questions, querying, that is basically a spatial query or an attribute query, and definitely the results will be interactively presented. That is the most important aspect of GIS. And as regards the GIS in impact prediction, GIS is suitable to deal with the spatial dimension of the impacts. It can also be used to make quantitative estimates of the features, such as, for example, the length of the road or a pipeline, the number of features, or even the land take caused by any development project. If, for instance, the total area of agricultural land that has been taken out because of the development projects. So these all been can be definitely captured using GIS. Okay. And with respect to the mitigation aspect, I was just time and again I was talking about the mitigation, because that's the most important thing. We need to choose the best alternative. And with respect to the GIS in mitigation, the GIS technology enables identification and evaluation of alternative locations, alternative locations for a development project. And that is the end result of GIS analysis. That's the most important thing. Further, if you look at it, the GIS spatial analysis, particularly the overlay, we will be discussing overlay analysis, can be used to identify and compare potential sites for development project. Okay. And that is the significance of any kind of spatial analysis tool. GIS technology can also be used to identify and target possible mitigation measures. That is inbuilt in this particular exercise of GIS and mitigation. It can also be used for simulating the effects of alternative mitigation strategies for individual impact themes. And nonetheless, the GIS is used in monitoring also, because that is the most important thing when you talk about a large scale development projects, and definitely the post development phase. And during the post development phase, GIS can be used for monitoring purpose also. So GIS can be used as a monitoring tool in case of monitoring data with the explicit spatial coverage, because spatial data is required. GIS finds use in identifying patterns in the data and for examining change over time. I am talking about the change analysis. So to conclude, GIS can be an important mapping tool that can relate a number of different variables by spatially referencing the data sets. GIS in fact is able to combine individual maps and databases and perform spatial analysis, which would be otherwise difficult and time consuming to perform manually. And when you talk about the GIS outcome, it is definitely with maximum accuracy we will be getting the output. GIS technology enables us to combine or use data collected from a variety of sources and at a variety of scales also. Further, in conjunction with external the models or the tools, GIS can be used to analyze quantitative data and modeling outcomes. And of course, the limitation, last one is the limitation. When you look at the limitation, the use of GIS is limited by the availability of the data sets with good spatial coverage. And it must be noted that the spatial data are costly to collect, and many of the EIAs resources will be targeted towards a small number of locations which are likely to be affected by a development project. Consequently, the use of GIS to do a complex EIA is likely to be restricted to larger well-funded development projects, for which development of a full map base is viable option. However, in case of a simple EIA, GIS is quite useful. When I talk about simple EIA, it requires a very limited amount of impact analysis like viewshed analysis or contouring. So in that case, definitely GIS can be very helpful, and the results results can be quite impressive in simple EIA, and considerably it will improve the overall quality of the final report.